Hello everyone. It's glad. I'm glad to be back. I hope you guys are all okay right now. I know that we in Korea are relatively safe right now, considering that the rest of the world is suffering from coronavirus 19. But each one of you praying every day. Hopefully you are under the protection of God. And this week, I'm sorry that there was a little bit of a technical problem in our Blackboard system. Somehow, there were too many people using the system, so the system down. So the system got down, and then the school wanted to renovate the whole system. They were rebuilding. They were like expanding the whole memory system. So it took 2 or 3 days. They tested it once, and then they just tested it again. So finally, the whole system got back early this week. So because of that, I'm a little late at this time. But don't worry, we will catch up soon. This week, according to my schedule. By the way, did you happen to receive this paper of mine? The paper of mine, like this one, this paper of mine. If you do not have this one, please download it from our website and then print it out and read it, okay? I'm using it as a guideline for my lectures, so please print this out and read it in advance, all right? Today, we will discuss Paul's Damascus experience. Last time, we discussed the Jewish background of Paul's Adam Christology. And this time, last time we discussed how Jews understood the story of Adam, and they actually used the Adam story in order to explain their current, present evil condition. And they are all dying, they have to go through death, and they are suffering. And especially the Jews in Second Temple period, they were suffering from foreign powers, right? The Palestine has been ruled by Assyrians, Persians, Babylonians, actually Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, and Romans. They've been ruled by foreigners for about 600 or 700 years before Jesus came. Obviously, they considered that as a very tragic condition of theirs. They are the people of God, right? Who should be their king? God. But God was not their king, obviously, at least, realistically speaking. So they used the Adam story in order to explain their current dire condition, and especially the condition of death and sin. Today, as a component of Paul's Adam Christology, we will discuss Paul's Damascus experience. And I want you to open Acts chapter 9. Acts chapter 9 and 1 to Acts chapter 9, 1 to 10. So let's open Acts chapter 9, verses 1 to 9. So why don't you stop this video and read this passage on your own. Acts chapter 9, verses 1 to 9. Did you finish reading it? All right. So Paul, before his conversion, was trained to be a Pharisee, Saul. Saul, a young guy at that time, obviously like 2 or 3 years after Jesus' death and resurrection, he was persecuting the Christians because they were claiming that Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus the crucified one is the Messiah of God, and at the same time he is God's son. So Paul was very angry, and Paul was not able to hold their belief and his belief in a good condition. He found that his belief and their belief were in conflict and tension, so he decided to get rid of it. So Paul, he went to Damascus to catch some of the believers who were proclaiming the Jesus gospel over there. So he got the letter from the high priest, and then he was on his way. But suddenly there was a light from heaven, and the resurrected Jesus appeared. And then Jesus said, "Paul, why are you persecuting me?" And Paul said, "Oh Lord, when did I persecute you? And who are you?" Jesus said, "I'm Jesus, the one you are persecuting." Did Paul happen to know the historical Jesus? I mean, Jesus on earth before his death and resurrection? Probably not. Probably not. We scholars conjecture that Paul has never met Jesus before while Jesus was alive on earth. So this was probably his first time, Paul's first time to meet the risen Jesus. The question is, how come he knew that this is Jesus? Well, Jesus said, "I'm Jesus, and you are persecuting." And then you know that Paul was pretty surprised because he has never seen anybody in light. Let's suppose that you encountered somebody on the day, and he appeared in bright light, which is much brighter than the sun. Then what will you make of it? What will you make of it? It's daytime, the sun is bright, but suddenly somebody appeared in bright glory or light, which is much lighter, much brighter than that of the sun. So what will you think of? When Paul encountered the risen Jesus there, his brain was analyzing that person, the bright Jesus, in terms of his own tradition, his Jewish tradition. Let's say in Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, when somebody appears in light, who must that person be? That person be either God or angel of the Lord. God or angel of the Lord. So when Paul encountered the risen Jesus in light, Paul thought that this guy is either God or angel of the Lord. So Paul was pretty surprised. Whether you see God or angel of the Lord, that experience must be really awful or frightening. But somehow the guy in front of Paul said to Paul that I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. So Paul was pretty surprised. Paul was there to persecute Jesus' disciples because they were proclaiming that the crucified Jesus was the Messiah and he is God's son. But Paul didn't believe their claim. Obviously, he rejected their gospel message, but now in front of him, there stands the risen Jesus in light. What does that mean to Paul? He has to change his opinion. He has to change his opinion about Jesus and the disciples. Before that encountering with the risen Jesus, Paul thought that he was right and those disciples were wrong. They were wrong. They misconceived Jesus as the Son of God, but obviously they were wrong, right? But now he sees the risen Jesus in light in front of him, so Paul has to change his opinion. They were right, now I'm wrong. What does that mean? Paul has to change his opinion about Jesus and his opinion about Christian Gospels, and at the same time, Paul has to change his own Pharisaic traditions. As a Pharisaic Jew, he always thought that he's a righteous Jew who is pleasing to God, and he tried to observe the law, and he tried to become a righteous person to make God pleased. But obviously, while he was trying to be pleasing to God, obviously it turned out that he is now displeasing God by persecuting God's Son. So Paul is in confusion. He thought to himself that, I was in completely wrong position and presupposition. That means that he has to change his thought world, his previous understanding of all Judaism. In other words, that's a completely, that event, meeting of the risen Jesus in Damascus, that was a completely life-shattering event for Paul. this we can call a paradigm shift. Paradigm shift. The whole paradigm become shifted, right? You are no longer you are no longer the one whom you used to be before the meeting, but after this meeting, you have to change yourself completely from beginning to end. That's why we call this event conversion. But usually people, when people speak of conversion, they think of conversion from one religion to another religion. So from Judaism to Christianity. However, this kind of denotation, understanding of conversion is a little wrong for Paul, because Paul didn't convert from Judaism to Christianity. At that time, there was no such thing as Christianity. But Paul, also after this event, Paul remained as a Jew. He went to Jewish synagogue on a sabbatical day, and he kept the law, and he talked with the Jews about God's Messiah. And also he used the Hebrew Bible, the Jewish Bible, to interpret Jesus and his faith. In other words, after this event, he remained as a Jew. So some scholars will say that we cannot speak of Paul's conversion. However, before this event, Paul used to be a Pharisaic Jew. But after this event, he leaves this Pharisaic Judaism. Instead, he joins Messianic Judaism, which is Christianity, Messianic Judaism. They belong to Judaism, but they believe that the Jewish Messiah has become true in Jesus. In other words, the promised Messiah of Judaism finally came. So we can call them Messianic Judaism. So Paul, he converted from Pharisaic Judaism to Messianic Judaism because of this event. In this sense, we can call this event conversion. So that's Paul's Damascus event. Scholars might be a little bit skeptical about this event, because what we just read before was the account by Luke, Paul's disciple. So probably written around mid-80s, and the event occurred around 32, 33. So about 50 years have passed, right? Luke is narrating the conversion story of Paul about 50 years later. So scholars are skeptical about the historical validity of Luke's account. So they say, oh, this is Luke's account, not Paul's. Are we 100% sure that this is what Paul experienced? Well, we may have some evidence in Paul's own writing. So let's open Galatians chapter 1. Galatians chapter 1. Galatians chapter 1, verse 10. Why don't you open the Bible, Galatians chapter 1 and verse 10, and read verses 10 through 24. 10 through 24. So why don't you stop watching this video, instead read Galatians chapter 1 verses 10 through 24. Okay, you guys back? All right. So Galatians chapter 1 verse 10. Here Paul says that, am I trying to please men? No, in that case, I do not be a bondservant of Christ. And then in verse 11 and 12, Paul says that the gospel that I preached to you is not from human being, because I didn't receive it from men, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ. Paul says that the gospel that I proclaimed, I received it through revelation of Jesus Christ from God. Through the revelation of Jesus Christ. In other words, somehow Paul says that Jesus was revealed to him. And when was he revealed? Yeah, in Damascus Road, Jesus was revealed. So somehow there is a kind of a connection between his account and Luke's account. And keep reading, right? Keep reading. Verse 13, Paul says, "You have heard of my former manner of life in Judaism, how I used to persecute the church of God beyond measure and try to destroy." Yeah, here Paul says that he used to persecute the church of God. At that time, he didn't know that Jesus' church, meeting was the church of God. Obviously, he didn't believe that, but now he knows that they were the real church of God. So Paul confesses that he used to persecute the church of God many years ago. So persecution, and from Acts, we know that that's what happened in Damascus Road. So obviously, revelation of Jesus Christ, and before that, he was persecuting the church of God. These two, help us remind of the Damascus event. There is a similarity between Paul's account here and Luke's account there in Acts. In verse 14, Paul says, "I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries among my countrymen, extremely zealous for my ancestral traditions." Paul says that he was very jealous for his ancestral traditions. Ancestral tradition is a technical term that was used by the Pharisaic Jew, referring to their own belief system of Judaism. Like inside Judaism, there were many trends, like Pharisees, Sadducees, Qumrans, and blah blah blah. So ancestral tradition, that term is a technical term used for referring to the Pharisaic Judaism. In other words, Paul says that at that time, when he was persecuting the church, he was a part of Pharisaism, Pharisaic Judaism. We are pretty certain that Paul, who was born in Tarsus, was brought up in Jerusalem, and then he was trained to be a Pharisee. Pharisee means a legal scholar, the scholar of the Torah. But verse 15, Paul says, "When God, who had set me apart from my mother's womb, called me through his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son in me so that I might preach him among the Gentiles, I did not immediately consult with flesh and blood." Here, Paul says that God revealed his Son to him so that Paul may proclaim Jesus among the Gentiles. This is very interesting because in Acts chapter 9, if we read a little bit further, then the reason Jesus will announce to Ananias, one of the disciples, that Paul will proclaim him among the Gentiles. So Paul's apostolic mission, mission to proclaim the Gospels, that is found in Acts chapter 9 and here Galatians chapter 1. So we are talking about the same story. The Damascus event in Acts, that's what Paul is referring to here in Galatians chapter 1. But one thing that is interesting to us is verse 15. God had set apart Paul even from his mother's womb and called him through his grace. This language is from Jeremiah. When Jeremiah was called by God to be his spokesperson, in other words, a prophet, Jeremiah confessed that God has set me apart from my mother's womb when I was still in my mother's womb. This is like a prophetic language. Now you are chosen to be a prophet by God. This is prophetic language. In other words, Paul is applying Jeremiah's language to him so that he may interpret his apostolic activity or apostolic mission as a part of his prophetic mission. So Paul considers himself as God's messenger, the prophet. Or in other terms, Paul considers himself as somebody who has to proclaim God's message, which is now found in the gospel of Jesus. So gospel of Jesus is Paul's message to proclaim as God's prophet, but to whom? Gentiles. That's very unique. Let me raise a question. when prophets were called in Hebrew Bible, God sent them to whom? Whom did God send the prophets? Yeah, God's people Israel. But now, here, Paul was called by God, and then he's sent by God to proclaim the gospel message. But to whom? Not Israel, but Gentiles. What does that mean? Gentiles are now part of God's people. Part of God's people. That's what makes Paul unique. Now, there is one more passage that Paul is explaining his previous life. That is found in Philippians chapter 3. Philippians chapter 3. Philippians chapter 3, verses 4 through 11. Verses 4 through 11. Why don't you read carefully Philippians chapter 3, verses 4 through 11. After stopping this video and after having read that passage, please come back again, okay? All right, are you guys back? So let's go back slowly to the passage. In verse 4, Paul says, I have confidence in the flesh. If anyone has confidence in the flesh, I am more than that. Verse 5, Paul says, I was circumcised in the flesh. What does that mean? Circumcision? Circumcision is a symbol of Abrahamic covenant, right? When God was making a covenant with Abraham, God said, I'll be your father, and your descendants will be my people, and your descendants will be as many as stars in heaven. However, your sons, your children, male children, has to go through circumcision. So circumcision is a symbol of Abrahamic covenant, meaning that they are the people of God. In other words, Paul had a circumcision, meaning Abrahamic descendant, meaning people of God. And then he was, nation of Israel, people of God, and tribe of Benjamin. Tribe of Benjamin, what's the implication of it? The least tribe of Israel, that's Benjamin. Tribe of Benjamin. However, Benjamin was the son who was born in the promised land among the 12. Also, the first king of Israel, Saul, is from the tribe of Benjamin. And also, when the northern kingdom rebelled against the tribe of Judah, only the tribe of Benjamin became loyal to the tribe of Judah. Thus, tribe of Judah and Benjamin, they constituted the southern Israel. Actually, southern Judah. And then Hebrew of Hebrews, and then as to the law of Pharisee, Paul here says that he used to be a Pharisee who was very zealous for the ancestral tradition, which is about the interpretation of the law. So he was a legal scholar. And then verse 6, he says, as to zeal, he was a persecutor of the church. As to a righteousness which is in the law, he found blameless. So he was very zealous for the righteousness, the ancestral traditions, and Pharisaism. However, because of that, he was a persecutor of the church. So now he's talking about his previous life before his conversion at Damascus. However, look at verse 7. But whatever things were gained to me, those things I have counted as loss for the sake of Christ. Because of the Christ, I count nothing, whatever was useful to me. In other words, Paul here is referring to his conversion experience in Damascus. Right? So, Paul in his letters, he doesn't speak much of himself. However, in Galatians chapter 1 and Philippians chapter 3, the passage that we just read, Paul is speaking about his current belief and his former life. His former life, Pharisee, zealous for the ancestral traditions, and he was proud of being a Jew, and he was very eager to abide by the law. However, he persecuted the church because they proclaimed that Jesus is the Messiah, a Son of God. However, something happened in between, but now he's the believer of Jesus. He is being persecuted for the sake of Christ, and he's proclaiming the gospel that Jesus is the Messiah, God's Son. they are completely different, right? His former life, his current life, they are completely different. And in between, something happened. And there was, Paul's conversion at the Damascus, on the way to his Damascus. On the way to Damascus. So this is what we call Paul's conversion experience at Damascus. So Damascus event was life-shattering event. Paul has to change his opinion of Jesus, and everything become changed. He cannot go back. He cannot go back to where he used to be. And this is a paradigm shift because now he has to change his opinion about Jesus and his religion and Judaism and the law and everything. He has to change completely of his opinion about everything. So this is a life-shattering event and paradigm change. Okay? Now let's take a 10-minute break, and in the next hour we will discuss what this event might have helped Paul understand or develop Adam Christology. Okay, the implication of the Damascus event for the development of Adam Christology. All right, I'll see you guys in a minute.